what's up? Welcome to the Trending Podcast. Pastor Ed here with Ruslan, and I'm telling you, this is a full circle moment. But before we go any further in introducing our special guest on the show today, I just got to give a little bit of a heads up of what we're doing with the Trending Podcast. This was just, if I could just express it this way, a social science experiment. This is what this was. We did a sermon series called Trending, and then we realized as we rolled out a particular podcast, Ruslan, each and every week we would discuss the sermon based upon the topic that we're talking about. And here's what happened, is actually more viewership began to log in and view the podcast than actually listen to the sermons that we were posting online. So it reached a different demographic. Then in the comments, which by the way, even right now, you need to be commenting on the subject matter that probably you want to have covered in this particular podcast, because the podcast is about how does culture have a tendency to help us, unfortunately, forget the biblical content in which we have been called to and adhere to as kingdom people. And the question that we've asked, and we know the answer to the question, is does the Bible define culture, or does the culture define our Bible? And what we've said is absolutely that the Word of God has to be preeminent over all things. Amen. Because truth is truth for all people, all places, all times. And so this particular podcast is taking the relevant, pertinent conversations that most churches sometimes have a tendency to not even speak to. Our Trending series every year speaks to those subjects. And then from that, it continues on the dialogue. We don't turn off the comments. We let people begin to have the conversations to once more learn how to actually respectfully dialogue and not demonize.
That's good.
And that's been the context. And I'll just say this, and it's turned into a couple dumpster fires along the way, and we didn't turn the comments off. And watching people banter through the process, there's been a lot of followship, unfollowship in the process, but we're here. And we went from an every week podcast, and this is the announcement, we're going to once a month because we want to be able to congeal some content together and be able to put together a presentation and a show each and every week that will be a blessing to you as we talk about once more trending topics, because it's not just a sermon series, it's each and every week. And we as the people of God with the Word of God got to speak to the situations that are taking place in context, which by the way brings me to the great introduction of Ruslan.
The introduction before the introduction.
But I was on record before we went live as that you're up there with Joe Rogan for me. I'm just going to be honest with you. and I know that you will push back on that. But for those of you that do not know Ruslan, KD, by the way, all right? So when it comes to the podcast, the YouTube, just the social media influence, you, my friend, tip of the spear of everything we just said. Biblical content, saturated in a presence of the leadership of the Holy Spirit, love you and your family, met you and just went, this is somebody. And the way I describe it sometimes is when you meet people, it's like a book that so impacts you, you fold that page over because you want to be able to access that. You were that page in my life that I didn't know, and all of a sudden I met, and the page folded over, and I went, God, there's a significant kingdom purpose for this relationship. And I just want to say thank you. Full circle moment. You're on this podcast that's brand new. It's literally 2 months old. And here you are.
I could tell you got tired of the crazy comments, which is why you went to monthly instead of weekly. You're like, these YouTube trolls, I'm over it. We're going to scale back.
That is not the reason why we went to once a month. I'm going to be real with you. I was like, man, how you deliver content is unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't read the comments. That's how I deliver the content.
Okay.
Stop reading the comments.
Well, I need to obviously get some. I mean, you are the Yoda in this moment for me. So,
well, listen. I'm grateful for you, and I was just talking to Caleb on the way here. You know my pastor, Pastor Jeff, and
love him.
You guys have something in common, which I think. They talk about the triple threat of content creation, which is being able to give a good take, being able to do a good interview, and then being able to have like some sort of analytical expertise on a topic, right? That's like the triple threat of content creation. But I feel like the triple threat of your world, which is very rare, or at least from my experience, is a pastor who's a great communicator, a great shepherd, like he'll do life with you, he'll sit and cry with you, and a great leader. And I haven't historically met pastors that are all three. Meaning that sometimes the great communicator, we kind of keep him tucked in the green room because he might say something stupid and piss somebody off,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Or they're a great shepherd and they'll sit there and they'll do life with you and they cry with you, but they don't really know how to preach very good.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're a great leader and a great CEO, but they're kind of rough around the edges because they read the stupid Steve Jobs book from 2007 and they think they could just treat their employees like crap, right? So it's refreshing to see you and just watching you around people, watching how you treat people, listening to how your team speaks about you and how they honor you but don't idolize you, how they respect you as a leader and trust your vision, but they still have autonomy and insight and they're still people with their own dreams, and that's really refreshing. And I don't know. I think maybe there's something shifting, So I think of you, I think of my pastor, I think of Pastor Chris Brown from North Coast Church in Vista. I'm Pastor Mike from V1, and I'm meeting more and more pastors that kind of have all of that. Like they're doing life with their people, they're leading well, and they're crushing it in their sermons, and they're great communicators. And so kudos to you, because that hasn't been my experience, if I'm going to be honest with you.
If I could probably, well, first and foremost, to put me in that category with those guys, I want to say thank you, man. To be complimented by you is significant because I respect you so highly. I think there's a key denominator in all of this is some of the best pastors I've ever met were first youth pastors.
Okay.
So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Interesting.
And that's how I cut my teeth.
Yeah, it's good. Or maybe because a lot of you guys are also like kind of found your stride in your 40s. And I grew up in an era where like guys were lead pastors at like 27, 28, and they're running mega churches at 27, 28. And like, oh man, I'm glad I didn't have anything going for me at 27, 28. Like, I'm glad like no one knew, no one cared. And so I think maybe that's something too.
I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have made it.
I don't think so.
I don't think I'd have made it.
Yeah.
And you have been speaking to this subject matter of leadership, culture, music. I mean, the approach that you take is it's not one-dimensional. It's multifaceted. To see you in conversations with Lecrae or see you in conversations with other significant, influential people in community in dialogue, theologically, it is the thing that I feel as if that people that are watching right now, this is why they're tuning in. And to have you on the show, some are hearing you for the first time. And man, your story is unbelievable. And just, would you take a moment just to introduce yourself?
Sure.
I mean, you have millions of followers, but when it comes to people that are hearing you for the first time, they're like, okay, who's Ruslan?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm like, well, he's a social media influencer, he's a content creator, he's a hip hop artist. And so it's like this massive resume of opportunity. But man, I think it's more important that people understand your background, your story, and how you got here.
Yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus. I became a follower of Jesus after having a fairly traumatic childhood of coming from a country called Azerbaijan, a lot of conflict in the Middle East. The pogroms of Baku led me and my family to come out as refugees. Armenians historically are like culturally Christian, but because we were in the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, Armenia, all that was Soviet Union, we didn't hear much about God. Like we didn't talk about God as a child. And so a bunch of ethnic cleansing broke out. There was Arzis that were getting displaced from Armenia. Armenians were then getting displaced from Azerbaijan. And so we kind of got caught up in the crosshairs of that. We had to flee Baku, which is where I was born. I lived there till I was 6, came to San Diego. And a few months after coming to San Diego, my mother and my father split. And so now my mom's a single mom, alcoholism rampant, just a pretty brutal situation for her to be in a new country. And then we have our introduction through the Armenian Apostolic Church to God. And that was beautiful at first. Like that was like the community hub of all of these refugees being in this church, right? So we were the first kind of family that came over from San Diego, and then there's like hundreds of families that end up coming over. And when you have refugees come over, a lot of other stuff comes over, especially from the Soviet Union. So you got a lot of guys that are, beating their wives, drunk driving. Remember multiple times my mom would get calls in the middle of the night of like husbands that like died drunk driving, So it's like they came over, but they came over with a lot of their trauma and their issues from being in, going through the pogroms and all that. And my experience in the church was initially really good. And then what happened was I was an altar boy. And the Armenian Apostolic Church is part of the Oriental Orthodox stream of the church. So you got like the Oriental Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholics, and then us Protestants. The Oriental Orthodox were the first to split, and it was good. I was an altar boy, and then there was some older altar boys that were like teenagers. I was like 7 or 8, and I ended up experiencing sexual assault as a kid, which then did a crazy number on my perspective of God. And so at like age 10, 11, I'm an atheist. Like at a very young age, using the word atheist. My father's not around. The church didn't handle that situation well. When it came out, I was kind of almost framed to look like the predator in the situation. I was the youngest one. I was 7 or 8, and these kids were like 13, 14. And I remember like my view of God and all that just really shifted. And all along, the Lord kept sending people who would just speak hope and life into me. And there was an apartment manager. Her name was Cherie. We lived in like one of those 8-unit apartments. And Cherie was the manager who got radically converted after she got arrested for moving dope through the airport. I don't know why she was moving dope through the airport.
Wow.
But she was like really in that life. And so me and her son were best friends. I was like my first like American friend, my mom's first American friend. And so she gets radically saved in jail, comes out, and like our entire apartment complex becomes Christian, and except the 2 refugee Armenian families. And yet there was always an invitation to the table while a correction of my behavior and of my outlook. And I got arrested at age 11, went to, a probation process, and I had to do community service at her church. It was like I like waited to the last minute. And so her got me connected with Charles and Willie, who were also neighbors of mine, and they were just kind of like sharing Jesus with me. I remember like being exposed to like Fred Hammond in the mid-90s and Kurt Franklin. I'm like this Armenian refugee white kid, and like my world is just like totally different than the average experience. And they just kept speaking hope into me, like,
come on,
like you're gonna grow up and do things for Jesus someday. And I was like, you guys are insane. Like there's no God, and if there's a God, he definitely doesn't like me. And they kept praying for me, and then finally, my mom relocated us to a suburb of San Diego called Vista, which is where you came and hung out. And just that change of life, that pace of life, I started dating a girl. The only way I could see her over the summertime, this is the end of my freshman year, so the only way I could see her over the summertime was to go to church with her and her family. And so I was just like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go check out this church thing. And within a couple years, the Lord just got a radical hold of my heart, and I had a pretty gnarly transformation. And going into my senior year, like I'm like Team Jesus. I gave like a public profession of faith at a Miles McPherson. He used to call them Miles Ahead Crusades, like this big crusade. Came down, and I just jumped into doing whatever I could. So I started this little Bible study called The Vessel of Hip Hop, which sounds kind of cringe in hindsight.
I like it.
We would do open mics. I would work at Pizza Hut, so I'd grab pizza, do an open mic, and invite all the kids that like didn't want to go to church. And we'd have freestyle battles, sometimes that were flowed into the parking lot. Sometimes they were clean and on stage. And I would just host a Bible study. And long story short, that moment of like engaging people right within the culture instead of just attacking them is what I just continued to do. I continued having these like open mic Bible studies. Then I led a men's group. Then I got, taught in the junior high, the high school, the young adults, the kids ministry. And all of that culminated to like, as the pandemic was happening, I was doing music full time. I started to talk about my faith more on my YouTube channel. I had a YouTube channel, it'd be podcasts, it'd be clips, it'd be like advice for other artists. And I started talking about my faith more, which I didn't really talk about my faith. And it just so happened that the thing that resonated the most with people was the thing I had done the most, which is like have meaningful conversations about God, faith, culture, current events. I did that longer than anything. I did that longer than doing music. I did that longer than like doing music professionally. And that was the thing that like kind of exploded my channel at the end of 2020. So I went from like 15,000 subscribers to like 65,000 subscribers. And then it just kind of kept scaling over since. And so now we're at, I don't know, the main channel's at like 660,000. We have a second channel. We reach over 1 million unique users a month. I think about 100,000 a day, like that watch.
Wow.
And it's phenomenal. Like I had those words of like, you're gonna do something great for the Lord, but I didn't really understand how that was going to materialize. And I didn't want to be a Christian influencer. Like that wasn't the goal, because everyone back then that was a Christian influencer like kind of cringed to me, So I was like, I don't want to be this like public professional Christian. I just wanted to do my music thing, be left alone. But for whatever reason, this is the thing that kind of took off. And it was really because I was serving other Christian musicians who wanted feedback from their music. And then they would ask me about other things. They'd be like, what do you think about this Maverick City thing? And I would be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like people are tripping, stop, And my audience really kind of made my niche. Like my music audience asked me what I thought about culture, current events, the church, this and that. And I just answered their question. And I thought, well, maybe I should clip one of these up. And I clipped them up. And then those were the videos that popped off for me during the pandemic when everything was locked down. And we brought the podcast back in 2022. I went on Tim Ross's podcast, brought the podcast back, and just been incrementally, slowly growing ever since.
So when it comes to content creation, how would you describe that? Because it is the most, it's palatable and it's digestive. So because it's real, it's current. So you're taking things that are trending, thus the trending podcast, and then you're giving almost simultaneous commentary along the way through a biblical kingdom focus.
Yes.
And that's the part that makes, because there's a lot of reactionary commentary in podcasting, but it's what does the Bible say?
Yeah.
And how does Scripture speak to this? And it's been received and it's been rejected and it's been debated and it's been discussed and it's been dismissed along the way, but yet you've stayed true and faithful to all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think any great service product, I'd extend this to ministry, maybe that's controversial, is going to speak to the needs of the people. So what are the felt needs of the community that exists? And if you can listen to your community and their felt needs and then provide solutions to them, I think that'll always win, right? And that's all, we've just tried to keep it simple. So like the content started as like, hey man, this is going on, this is crazy, what do you think about this? I need help processing this. And that was really what it was. And so we just would listen to what our audience asked us. And then we figured out, our audience, they kind of keep up with the news and they like culture and they like music and they might even listen to secular music and they don't know if they should be listening, right? And so we just kind of started speaking into what they were asking us. And so this day, that's what we do. Every day we do our live streams Monday through Thursday. We post them on our Patreon and we go, hey, let us know what topics you have. And sometimes our best videos are things that our audience requests us to speak into. And we just give our commentary on what's going on. We try to bring it back to Scripture, like you said. Or at the very least, if it's not directly to a Bible verse, most videos will land at some sort of Bible passage. At the very least, a biblical worldview. Like this is how we should be thinking about it biblically. And as there's so much uncertainty in the world, as there's so much chaos, I think people want someone or something that just kind of calms them down and almost, they call it keep you company content. Like I just don't, I'm afraid and there's uncertainty and I don't want to just be in my head. Let me put on something that's going to keep me company, but also give me life and give me hope.
That's huge. How would you say, because I think there's such a draw to podcasts and information much like that, which there's a lot of that, but I think there are those that are kind of above the fray, and I think that's you. We're talking about Cat. Is it Chatfield? Is that
Chatfield? Yeah.
I mean, just solid, just continuing to point people in the direction of what the kingdom is about. But when it comes to that kind of content, being in churches, which is why this trending series that we do each and every year is kind of this love-hate relationship, because it draws people, but yet at the same time divides people and pushes people. And I remember saying this about 3 years ago when we started doing the trending podcast. And so we would talk about transgenderism, homosexuality, the border, what does it look like to vote biblically? And so we started having these conversations. And I remember saying out loud, this sermon series will purge our church. And I came home and my wife, Stephanie, and you'll meet her in just a few minutes, she said, Ed, I need you to stop saying that.
That's good.
She goes, that's not what the Lord has for us.
Wow.
People need to hear truth.
Yeah.
And she goes, I think it's going to be the opposite.
Yeah.
I think it's going to grow our church.
Yeah.
Not purge it.
Wow.
And that's exactly what God did. And I'll tell you why. It's because it gave clarity to what we believe at this local fellowship.
Yeah.
But yet it's still debatable in churches amongst some pastors philosophically of this content. Does it make it to church, or should the church just stay out of this conversation? All right, can we go there?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, and this is going to be controversial, and this might get me in trouble or get you in trouble. I not came up, but in the mid 2010s, there was this movement where a lot of churches were reaching people culturally, like people that would never go to church, but they weren't being honest about what they believed about the issues. And it would say things like, we don't have those conversations publicly, those are private conversations, right? And the people who were being impacted by this, specifically people from the LGBTQIA community, people who were perhaps more on the leftist side of the spectrum with their political ideologies, were like, wait a minute, like, you got us in here and you told us we belonged. But then when we wanted to be in leadership, you were like, You said that like we were welcome, but like, except when this came up.
Yeah.
I wish you just would have been honest with us. Right? And that was a big blowout. And there's been documentaries made about this. There's been a lot of and so I think that it actually serves those people well to be like, yeah, man, like, no, we're not with abortion. No, that's not okay. It's not okay, right? Hey, no, like marriage is for one man, one woman, one lifetime. Period. That's a done deal. God does this. You can change the word. A relationship between two persons and with legal benefit. You can change the words all you want, but no, this is what marriage is. This is what we stand on. And I believe that it actually serves those people well by being clear and being specific and being direct and saying, this is where we are. Now, I need to be bold publicly about where we are, but personally, I could be gentle and we could have conversations about these things. And so I end up inviting people onto my channel. Sometimes I have a couple of videos that went viral on Instagram lately about the pro-life thing.
Which was an incredible clip.
Yeah, and here's the thing. To your point, like I'm glad that you're doing this podcast. By the way, I think every pastor should have a podcast. I think it's just wisdom. But there's a difference between an Instagram clip, a YouTube clip, a podcast, a Sunday morning sermon. The packaging and the ability to expand is different, right? And so that's actually my Shorts editor just kind of took it and ran with it. Like I would normally not put a clip like that on Instagram because it's very difficult to nuance that in 60 seconds, right? So he's taking a 20-minute video and taking out 60 seconds. And so, but I was like, man, great job. Because you sometimes you are more bold than I am because I'm hesitant about the platform and not wanting to completely alienate the non-Christians in my circle. And he did it anyway, which I was like, man, you're right. Like we should put these clips out. Let's just not make everything about these issues on Instagram, at least. An hour-long conversation is different. A 30-minute conversation is different. And so, like, that was a clip about the unborn issue that, like, I think will catch me a lot of backlash. But what I'll do is I'll go, okay, cool. How about you call into the stream? And let's talk.
Yeah.
And people were like, really? Like, so they'll go from lighting me up in the Instagram comments about how much of a bigot I am and how much I want to control women's bodies and all this foolishness. And I'm like, how about we call? Like, we could talk face to face, and you lay out your, and some folks have called in. I remember there's a guy that called in and said I had fascist-like tendencies. And I was like, well, can you define fascism? And he just no definition. And then he started talking about the issue of the kids and the transitioning and all that kind of stuff. I was like, that like these are the same medication that they give to castrate male sex offenders in Europe? And he's like, no, I didn't know that. And then I played a clip from someone in Europe, and they're like, oh, we don't. And so I'll just here's the thing. I think we would be way better off by believing that people actually want what's best for people. People who disagree with actually want what's best for people. They're just either misinformed or just coming from a false worldview, or there's a spiritual component. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities, right? So if we start with the premise that like even the unregenerate person, even the person that's not a Christian, even the person that thinks we're bigots and we're bad people, are in their framework are actually wanting what's best for people. They're just wrong. Right? They're just wrong. They're not, they either don't have all the information. Like the fact that I pointed out, hey, 99% of these abortions are actually done as an elective procedure for birth control.
Yes, sir.
People don't know that.
Correct.
Which, if you're slightly connected to the pro-life position, you know that. So then we could talk about, you want to talk about the fringe of the fringe cases. How about we agree that 99% of these things shouldn't be happening, and then we could talk about the potential exceptions. But if we can't agree that the 99% shouldn't be happening, why am I going to have a conversation with you about exceptions?
Well said.
Right? And so But people don't even have that information. People didn't have the information on puberty blockers. There's an article, a study published by doctors right now that they refused to put out because they thought it would be too politically charged, that these things actually don't have a net positive on kids' mental health, that they do more harm than good. And they just didn't run the story because they're like, oh, it's too, well, don't we want that information? Because, by the way, Europe is starting to nail it with some of this stuff. So I think most people just don't know what they don't know, and they've never seen a biologically born man compete against women in basketball. They don't know what they don't know, and then they are operating from weaponized empathy. I know you're a Christian who has a heart towards the marginalized and towards folks that are hurting. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to use that against you. And I'm going to tell you, you don't even get to speak on the unborn unless you've adopted 10 kids. It's like, wait a minute. Wait. Hold on. I can't have a position against a moral issue, about a moral issue, unless and then say I have. You don't know what I'm doing in my personal life.
Right.
Say I have, right? Matthew 6 says, let your works be done in secret. So do you want me to then plaster my actual things that I do with single moms and kids that may have been aborted? You want me to put that on social media? Like, that's weird.
Right.
Why? How about I just have an opinion and you could have an opinion, and then we could look at the sources and the data and what's a reasonable position on these things? So anyway, I know that was a long answer, but that's really the heart behind it. Is like, I don't want to demonize people for being wrong. Like, you're just wrong. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'll concede, maybe we're not maybe the church or conservatives or the right or whatever you want to call it haven't been the best on talking about our heart for the marginalized, our heart for poor people, our heart for the broken, our heart for people that are incapable of caring for themselves to various degrees. Maybe we need to do a better job of that. We can cast vision on that. We can be more clear about that. But that doesn't mean that we're wrong on these issues. No, we're right. You just haven't caught up yet.
Well, and science has continued to validate, research has continued to validate. Biblical principles have been around for thousands of years.
That's right.
And so as we've walked through marriage, we've walked through gender, we talked about even just the duplicity and the hypocrisy of the silence of the feminist movement in the midst of all of this that's been advocating for women's rights, but yet doesn't speak up for the women that are losing opportunities because of biological men competing as transgender women. So these conversations are just simple, logical conversations, but they're also substantiated by Scripture. And the comments are just you have people that are just lobbing grenades in the midst of this. And you said it so well, because they're just bite-sized clips and they're not the full content of all of those things. But in the process of that, then you're labeled all of these phrases and all these stereotypes along the way. But you have stayed true to all of it.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate about you is that you're anchored in truth, because we live in a relativistic society.
Yeah, that's true.
And as we're postmodern, humanism, secularism, all the isms, but we talk about relativism, and I've said this to our church, all of that's cute till somebody gets hurt.
That's right.
Then you want justice. But if you don't have a foundation of absolute truth, then how do you vindicate the wrong?
Yeah.
Without truth.
Yeah.
And then they go, well, truth says that somebody should pay the fine or do the time or whatever it may be. But you go, but where do you come up with that premise? If you don't believe in truth? So it becomes selective truth.
Yes.
And that's what we're dealing with. And so as we're battling for truth in this process, but if you don't have the Word of God as the baseline of this, and Romans 1 talks about God has put His moral code in our heart. So whether you're a follower of God or not, you know the difference between right and wrong. Now, our conscience could be seared.
Yeah.
And culture will do that to you. And I think that's where we're at today.
Yeah.
Is that there's a callousness to this.
Yes.
Where deep down inside, and here's the truth, if the church doesn't speak up about this, we're losing a generation. And you as a primary content creator, and I love where this is going, our young generation, Gen Z, is stepping into social media, stepping onto social platforms and preaching truth.
Yeah. Well, they're the most marketed generation ever, marketed to generation ever. So they're tired of this curated version of like PC language and all of it. I think they're just sick and tired of it. And I think I call them Zoomers, would prefer that you just keep it a buck with them. Just tell them where you're at. Like, you think this is wrong? Okay, tell me that. Don't play games with me. And so I think we've started using some of the tactics of whatever you want to call it, the far left in the church, right? Like, so it's like we're not clear. We change words. We're very like shifty on things, and I'm just like, nah. Like you need to just be bold and just say what it is, and then let the fallout be. Because if they really knew what you believed, no matter how much you nuanced it, they would still feel the way they feel. Like you could give all these caveats, but there's going to be a certain demographic of people that are like always going to think I'm a bigot.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I going to water down what I believe? Why am I going to change my vocabulary and change language to suit them?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Totally. Well, when we speak about the LGBTQIA community here, we kind of gave this qualifier. There's several different types of responses. There's alienation, where you're not allowed here. You're not welcome here.
Yep.
And that's not who we are. And we've said that. That's not who we are. Then there's the avoidance. We just don't talk about it at all and act like it's not even a real issue. And then there's those that just say, okay, we're going to be affirming. And we're just going to go, hey, listen, that's your choice, and God's cool with it. But then we come to the accepting reality that all have sinned. We don't make it the primary issue. But when it comes to leadership, just like we wouldn't allow somebody that's cheating on their taxes.
That's right.
Or that's in an adulterous relationship, or that is abusing somebody verbally, you're disqualified for leadership.
Yep.
Is the same truth that we would say to somebody that's living in homosexual sin. And for us, what's so crazy about this conversation is that the people from the LGBTQTIA community has come to me and said, hey, listen, disagree, but man, we love you. And I want to tell you why. Because you've told the church that if you say they gotta go, then that Pharisaical mindset has to go just as much, because that's not welcome here.
Yeah.
That's not welcome here. So it's this tension of it's a sin, but we've all sinned.
Yep.
It's the tension of everyone's welcome here. And there's gonna be moments where sin will confront all of us. I've always said this. Just if you feel like you're doing well, just read a couple more pages of the Bible. You'll get busted. You'll get confronted. And so for us, equal opportunity offender, the gospel's offensive, is good news, but it's got to be bad news. And in the process of all of it, to me, it's about the identity issue. Yeah. Anything that you put your identity in, Republican, Democrat, homosexual, transgender, whatever it may be, it's a misplaced modifier.
That's right.
It's what we've always said. So for us, we're always going to speak to the misplaced modifier. Whatever that is, that's what we're speaking to. Christ alone, crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, dead man walking, John the Baptist, he must increase, I must decrease. It's the backwards life. This is what we're moving towards. Yeah. And but in the honesty of it, here's what's crazy. It's not the people that you're speaking to that get offended. They appreciate the truthfulness, and then, oh, okay, I see where you stand.
Yeah.
Thank you for loving me.
Yes.
But for me, in this conversation, there's so many different hot buttons along the way, and it feels as if that every weekend we could talk about something else. And so how do you balance that tension of, okay, want to be hopeful, want to be inspiring, want to be edifying, but also want to clarify truth? And it doesn't just feel like, man, I'm just trying, because there's a lot of content creators that are just trying to capitalize on the divisiveness of the conversation because it gets clicks. It's just all clicks. So how do you balance just in your delivery of content creation to speak to issues but be hopeful to the one that's going, man, I'm coming to you because I need hope.
Well, it could definitely be a delicate balance, because you're right. The stuff that's the most divisive, most polarizing, most doom and gloom is the stuff that performs better in the algorithm. Like, that just is the reality. And so we've intentionally adjusted multiple aspects at the detriment of views, and just being like, I'm okay with it. Like, I'm okay with getting less views, but building better culture, because I think that ultimately we want to build better culture. We want to equip people to do the work of the ministry,
that's good.
Not just sit and complain about the other side and how bad they are and how stupid the world is. So how do we balance that? I think I want to listen to people and hear what they're saying, what aspects of it are true, with pointing them back to the truth. And so I could take almost any ridiculous thing that's happening in the zeitgeist and make a video and flip it. So here's an example. Here's a practical example. So we did a video on, this is really bizarre, but there was a video on, so all this stuff on X after the hurricanes in Florida, and massive massive people saying these are man-made hurricanes because they want to flip Florida and make it so people can't vote in Florida and North Carolina.
I heard it.
And it's in time for the election cycle.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, hold on, wait. And so instead of just being like, you guys, come on, you guys are dumb, like stop it. What I did is I actually went and looked into it, and I was like, oh, like there is such a thing as called seeding.
Yes.
In the sky.
It happened in Dubai.
It happened in San Diego. Because we were in a massive drought, and I found out that they were saying that it was happening in California. We were in a massive drought, and all of a sudden we started to get a bunch of rain, and they're like, oh, they're probably seeding the sky to create more rain, which is pretty remarkable technologically speaking, right? If you're in an area like Dubai. Now in Dubai they overdid it and it caused a bunch of issues.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, so let's acknowledge that there is an inkling of truth to what you're saying, that yes, we can influence the weather through technology, which is by golly, a pretty remarkable feat that now if you're in a daggone drought and you're in an agricultural society, come on, that's pretty amazing. However, just because this can happen, that doesn't mean that it did happen, and that doesn't mean that this caused 2 hurricanes back to back in a state that's fairly deep red now to get them to go blue 4 weeks before let's think through this a bit, right? And so people who watch the beginning of the video or who are like, oh, this is great, you're talking about it. And then I'm like, yeah, but keep going. And then like at the 9-minute mark, the video takes a turn and they go, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to do more research, right? This is like, that's the point. Like, that's the point. And so taking them to a place of like, let me acknowledge what you're feeling, because every degree of, if you want to call it a conspiracy theory or whatever, has some point of truth to it, but let's get you to the truth. And ultimately, the truth is that Psalms 24:1, like the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all the people in it. Like Jesus is really on the throne right now.
Yeah.
He's over the election. He's over all these things. He's over everything. He's over the weather. He's provident. He's sovereign over everything, and trying to get people to that place.
That's good.
And so that's a tricky balance. That could be a tricky balance. So we'll get a lot of accusations of like clickbait,
Yeah.
And so how we look at it, and my buddy Sean Cannell from Think Media said it. He said it's not clickbait, it's click bless. Get them to see something that they're intrigued by and they're interested in. Get them to click into it. Deliver on what the actual, because clickbait is like, to me, is like the video says this and it's that.
Right.
Those videos get completely tanked in the algorithm. They get ratioed. But if you're saying, hey, are they causing the weather to change? And then you click into it, and then it's actually a breakdown of all these scientists saying, here's what we can do, and then taking them to the truth. That's a click bless video. We're going to get you to click in, and then we're going to give you some hope, and we're going to bless you. And to me, I mean, listen, who needs more hope and more blessing than the people that are really enamored with all of these different things that are going on in the world, and the cabals and the elite state? And all. Like those, to me, those are the people that actually need the hope. Is the people that are growing in this despair and this nihilism that the system is rigged, and I'll never get ahead, and it's over for me, and my parents had it better than me. Those are very real feelings. But can we redirect that to kingdom living?
I got 1,000 questions I want to ask you because you brought up cabal. I also look back to one of your recent clips about aliens. And I'm like, did Ruslan just break down what's going on with aliens right now? So for the people that are just hearing this for the first time, let's talk about aliens.
Let's talk about aliens.
And let's talk about the cabal, all right? Okay. And not that they're connected.
Sure.
Or maybe they are.
Or maybe they are.
Aliens.
Okay.
Did that come from people that suggested like, hey, Ruslan, come on, break this down. There's a lot of UFO sightings.
Yeah.
And that's where that came from.
Absolutely. People are talking about it. People are asking me about it. People are freaking out about it. And I've always been into it. Before I was a Christian, there was like, something's going on, right? And then when I became a Christian, early on, there was a book given to me by a mentor of mine, and it was about the Nephilim. And it was this whole theory about these dismembered, beings who, got wiped out physically through the flood, but somehow they keep materializing later on in Scripture. And like, what if that is what we're seeing with some of these alien sightings and these beings that are outside our realm and all this sort of stuff? Because it's like, it's either that or it's Russia. And there was a theory of that. Like, there's a whole Rogan episode of like, this is. Then I'm not trying to be offensive, but the theory on Rogan laid out. I don't remember which episode it was, but I'm sure somebody could dig it up. Was that Russia was taking, what is the right word?
Weather balloons?
No. No, they were taking small people. How do you say it without being offensive? You know what I'm talking about. Small people who would be, maybe they would have like Down syndrome or something like that, and they would put them in these planes, in these incredible technological advanced things that we've never seen, and that was the theory for aliens. Like that was a theory laid out for aliens. And it's like, okay, so either this is Russia and little people, or it's technology that doesn't, like it's impossible for it to exist, to travel at the speed that it would have to travel to come from a different galaxy or different universe. It's not possible from a physics standpoint. Some people will try to say it would be unprecedented to travel past the speed of light, right?
Right.
Or it's actually a different realm that we're dealing with that can manifest in physical realities through these sort of shape-shifting beings.
There's a lot of shape-shifting videos right now.
Right? And so I go, well, I don't think Russia, as someone that comes from the Soviet Union, is more technologically advanced than the United States.
Or could it be demonic?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Those beings, those shape-shifting beings,
Yep.
I think the most logical conclusion is that it's demonic. It's the spiritual forces manifesting in physical realities. Ephesians 6 talks about it, connecting it to the Nephilim. There's some connection, and I'm not saying this is the same as Scripture, but there's some connection to the explanation that's in the book of Enoch.
Yes.
And I go, well, out of those three options, I think they are demons seems like the most logical, reasonable conclusion.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
The cabal. Who do you think's in it?
Okay, so the cabal is an interesting one because this is how I think. There's a theory, never ascribe malice intent to which can be explained with incompetence. I think much of our issues in society and in culture is a downstream effects of incompetent people and just stupid people. So even like the deep state, when you talk about the deep state, people are thinking a cabal. But then when you actually listen to Vivek, you listen to Trump, you listen to some of these folks and they start describing the deep state, they're really describing the Washington elite bureaucratic class. So it's the people that have been there, it's the CIA directors, it's the people that are indefinitely positioned into Washington, and then like the people that are kind of there despite the administration. So the deep state is really just this massive inflated bureaucratic staff of people that's in Washington regardless of who gets elected, and the lobbyists and them they're kind of all working together, right? I think that to me is a way more logical explanation than some like deep shadowy room. Now, I do think there's something to this like World Economic Forum, the George Soros.
Please say something about Bill Gates right now.
The Bill Gates types. And again, these people, in their framework, they think they're trying to help people.
In eugenics.
Yes. In eugenics, in population
control. The fact that this podcast has now just started talking about population control, somebody.
Yeah, well, because they're thinking that the earth will become uninhabitable because of the climate crisis and all this stuff. And so they are, from their framework, whether it's trying to eliminate meat and the production of dairy and meat, whether it's, hey, you're gonna own nothing and you're gonna love it. In their framework, from their worldview, which is a godless worldview, they think they're trying to help people, but they don't. They're missing, again, either Jesus and an encounter with Jesus, or just practical information, like the fact that we could talk about the climate crisis all you want, but here's what you got to deal with. The reality is, do you want hundreds and millions of people starving because they can't get access to dirty energy? Or are you okay with potentially, we don't even know how bad this is, there being some effects of man-made climate issues from emissions, right? Nevertheless, the earth is more green than it's ever been before, which is like, okay, I don't know how to make sense of that. So they're missing information that, like, if Pakistan, parts of Africa don't use the reserves of oil that they're sitting on, the natural resources they're sitting on, people are going to starve now.
Right.
Do you want people to starve now, or do you want the potentials of weather disruptions 100 years from now or 50 years from now? I don't know, man. I think we should like pull as many people out of poverty by any means necessary, and then hopefully we catch up with the technology that can change what's going on with EVs. And this is like, I'm a Tesla guy. My wife drives a Tesla. I drive a Tesla. We have solar panels. We don't go to the gas station. Our actual emission, like, we are that people, but it's because it's practical and it's technological, and it makes sense for us to have solar, generate our own power, be off the grid if we need to be with our batteries, never have to go to the gas station. It just makes sense. So I think Like, let's pull people out of poverty by any means necessary, and then what we could figure out and solve for technologically. The George Soros and the Bill Gates, they're not there because, again, I think they're missing information. I think they're missing vital information about this sort of stuff. So then they do things that they think is in the best interest of people, but you're actually doing more harm than good.
Well, you mentioned EVs, and we talk about lithium, and we talk about cobalt, and we talk about where that's being harvested from.
Yeah, slave labor.
Slave labor.
Yeah.
And so everything pushing in that direction, and you go, okay, we're not even talking about power grids. We're talking about where are we getting this source from?
Yeah.
And praise God for some companies and some entities that are going into these native locations and trying to create a sustainable economy for those who actually live there, all the while China is coming into places and buying up spaces.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, can we speak to China now?
It's flat out, what is the word, colonialism, imperialism, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
They're going up and giving these countries massive amounts of loans that they are never going to be able to pay back. And so now they're owning multiple pieces of these mines and building infrastructure, but at what expense? And so they're swooping up in lots of parts of Africa. Yeah, they're taking out these loans from they're never going to be able to ever pay back. And so now they're expanding in controlling the supply chain.
And that's where this EV conversation gets just a little wonky for me. In that process. You mentioned Bill Gates. You talked about eugenics. We talked about population control, Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
Very much a part of that process.
Well, I mean, we could talk about the origins of Planned Parenthood.
Yes, sir.
And the for my opinion, like the overt use of eugenics and just flat out racism. I don't know how people try to rationalize the stuff that she said. What's her name? Margaret Sanger. But I mean, she said what she said. She said some pretty wild stuff, and people can fact check, man. So they try to rationalize some of these things.
They speak for her.
They try to clean it up. But how about this? How about the reality that there's a huge number of people who get birth control from them that fails right now.
Right.
So they're giving out free birth control, but it's not effective. Not to mention, is it even good? What's it doing to your body? Is it even good? And so, gosh, that sounds oddly convenient that the place that the abortion mill that gives out the most amount also gives out faulty birth control.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. And then again, okay, so the argument, there's a book and a documentary called Freakonomics, and the argument for abortion, their argument for abortion was it's helped decrease crime. Because all the people that would have been born into lower income situations who would have gone on to become criminals were yeeted 20, 30 years ago because of reproductive rights.
Yep.
Okay, first of all, causation is not correlation, okay? Correlation is not causation, excuse me. Second of all, you're assuming that this is actually a net positive. What we're seeing is the declining birth rates are actually a net negative globally. South Korea, Japan, it's starting to come to America. So we're not even able to maintain our population at the current rates. And so I think a very pragmatic argument, this is my argument, but a very pragmatic argument for the pro-life position is, hey man, we're not gonna be around if we don't keep up our birth rate. So you want Social Security and the elderly to be supported? That means you need a certain number of worker bees in the system to take care of the old people by paying into Social Security. Like that's a very, very cold, pragmatic argument for that. But again, you're talking about population control and all this stuff, and you're just not factoring in the bare bones of you can't keep going with these declining birth rates. Like the society is going to suffer, and it's already suffering in Japan and South Korea. And so it's crazy how much stuff that, again, information. People just don't know what they don't know. And so they're trying to say these things, and it's like you don't really understand the consequences of what's happening.
Well, when we talk about these multifaceted issues and a biblical response through a biblical worldview, which I could not stress more enough. Yeah. If you don't have a biblical worldview, and how you view the world is always going to be tainted by the fact that you see it through some form of ism.
Yes.
There is an ism that you will see it that creates a prism or a prison and holds you into a place of it's always going to be like this and nobody can change your mind.
Well, the question becomes, when we're faced with adversity, when we're faced with challenging situations, biblical worldview, do we go look in the mirror or do we go look out the window and blame the world and the systems, right? And especially today, we're not under no crazy fascist regime that is controlling what we can and can't do in the West, right? Speaking for the West specifically. Right. North Korea is different, right? China is different. But here, if there's problems in my life, I got to go look in the mirror. I don't go look outside and look out the window and say, what's going on? Why is the system? Why is this? Why is that? Why is this? I get agency. I have to make certain choices, wise, foolish choices. Now, I don't control everything. I don't control inflation. I don't control all these things. But what I control, the controllables, have a way bigger impact on my day-to-day and my family and my community than whatever ism is happening in society. Even if I were to concede give me an ism, and I would say, sure, I'll give you all the isms. My control still has way more impact than the isms and my God being able to move in my situations.
Well, and Tony Evans talks about the 4 different governments and individual government, there's family government, church government, and civil government. And I remember reading this and I was like, it was just an epiphany. He said when civil government reaches into church government and church government or civil government reaches into family government and civil government reaches into individual government, which by the way, that's what we're starting to see.
That's right.
Yep. And we're moving down that slippery slope. But he kind of reverse engineers and says, but if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others.
That's right.
And if you can't lead yourself and you can't lead others, it's probably not good that you get married and try to have a family.
That's right. Yeah.
But God, in the blueprint of how he's created us in autonomy and free will, but yet in sovereignty and his providential grace, this is this tension that we could talk about climate control. But we live in a fallen planet. I mean, sin didn't just affect Adam and Eve. It affected creation.
Right.
So it kind of goes back to marijuana. Well, man, God put it on the earth, but it was cursed. So there's good plants and there's bad plants. There's toxic plants and poisonous plants. Right. So when we talk about all the dimensions of how this works, it's interesting that God's government, God's kingdom, God's domain, God's rule, it is oftentimes interpreted as cruel commandments, but they're sweet solutions. But so many times people just go, well, that's not a part of my worldview. But and yet, these are just logical principles where oftentimes where we look at fences around backyards, and with any pet owner, you go, man, it's not so much that you don't want to let the pet to get out. It's the fact that you don't want other stuff to get in.
That's right.
And so God gives these boundaries and barriers for the protection of what's inside of us.
Yes.
It's not so like you can't have fun and you can't live this certain way. Yeah. God's protecting us from us.
Yes. Well, and I would argue that a lot of what we're dealing with and the sin that we're dealing with, I definitely think there are ways Romans talks about they created new ways to do evil, right?
Yes.
But I think a lot of what people are wrestling with is pleasure misdirected.
Yeah.
Right?
It's good.
Like beauty perverted. Right? It's the thing. It's actually things that God wants us to enjoy, and then we take it and we pervert it and we go in a totally different direction with it, and we distort it. And so whether it's sexuality, whether it's drugs, whatever it is, like it's actually the same desire to want closeness, intimacy with God, to want to feel purpose, to want to be in a marriage that's covenantal and protected, and then we take it and we just out of order, and we think that we can behave like the animals, and it's like we're not animals.
Right.
Like we're not just highly evolved animals. We're humans. There's a distinction between us, and it's that perversion that I think has done because these things feel good for a reason, but out of their proper context, they'll destroy you.
Well, and that's the definition of sin is fulfilling legitimate needs in illegitimate ways.
That's a gem. Is that original?
No, but it should be.
It should be. That's really good. That's really good. Say that one.
Sin is fulfilling legitimate needs in illegitimate ways.
Oh, that's good.
So you kind of go back to the garden and you go, is fruit bad?
Yeah.
No, fruit's not bad.
Right.
Fruit's good. Yeah. It's just that particular fruit.
Yep.
And that's always been the temptation of the enemy.
Yeah.
Is to go, did God surely say?
Yes.
Did God really care?
Yeah.
He takes your eye off the abundant of all the other trees and puts your eye on the tree that was forbidden. Thus takes your eyes off the blessing of God's will and his way and goes, but what about this?
Yeah, that's good.
And then the moment you partake of that, it's like what Lecrae said, it's the honey dip lie.
Yeah.
And so in the process of all of that, we see the brokenness.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty. You've seen the gospel presentation of the 3 circles, God's perfect design, And then by free will, we reject God, and then it leads to brokenness. And then you have a God that comes out of heaven and comes into the brokenness to restore us back into his perfect design. And that is the beauty of God. That's how the Bible ends, which, by the way, when you think about the Bible, it doesn't parade perfect people. It parades a perfect God. Actually, you think about this, and you're a writer. We're going to get to your book in just a second, but you go, if you're compiling the Bible, telling the story of God, you're highlighting the imperfections of humanity.
Oh, yeah.
You would like leave it all out to highlight just the perfection of God, but yet it magnifies the glory of God that steps into brokenness and takes broken pieces and makes masterpieces.
Well, I mean, to your point, even I think that whole like not being afraid of highlighting the brokenness in the scriptures, I think is a great argument for the scriptures being true. In that this has to be orchestrated by God, because why? Who in their right mind would be like, we're trying to build a religion, so we're going to put 1 Corinthians in there, a letter written to a worldly church that's okay with a dude sleeping with his stepmom in the church. And Paul has to keep reminding them to stop being sexually immoral and stop doing these weird things they're doing.
And stop getting drunk at communion.
Like, no one is like, I'm going to build a religion and I'm going to put that in there. It's like, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me that there was a church in the first century, 1 Corinthians 15, jacked up. 1 Corinthians 15 says that some of the folks there were around when Jesus ascended, right? 500 people, many of which are. So this is like, they're not. He's writing that chapter as if you guys may know some of these people that saw Jesus, the 500 that saw a physical resurrection.
Like, I know Ruslan, he saw Jesus.
Right, he saw Jesus. And he's writing that, and then in the midst of this completely just carnal sounding church, and like, who would put that in there? And then he has to write him a second letter. It's like, you guys didn't listen. In 1 Corinthians, they say 1 Corinthians is the second one, right? So he's like, he has to keep writing them over and over, telling them the same thing, like, stop being sexually immoral.
Rebuke.
Right? Who would put that in there? It doesn't make any sense.
None at all, but that is the beauty of the sovereignty of the scarlet thread of God, that we have a God that would come to the straw. That's how we say it. But man, I'm so intrigued by just you're multifaceted, and just not in just content. Your biblical knowledge is just, it's premier, man. Any seminary training, by the way?
No, I'm
because you're so astute, brother.
Okay, so no formal seminary training, but the two things. One, we read through the Bible cover to cover in my men's group. So we used to have this really intense men's group where we would weigh in, do goals, hold
like
people
literally weigh in.
Like, hey man,
you getting fat?
You're getting a little sloppy, dog.
Yeah.
What are your fitness goals? And we would all set fitness goals, and then before we'd do exercise, we'd work out or we'd go play ball, and then everybody would weigh in, and like based on your own goals, we'd have to like hold you accountable. Very intense group. Probably overdid it. So we read through the Bible cover to cover in that group, I'd say at least 3 or 4 times, like the 1-year Bible where you're doing the Old Testament, New Testament, Psalm, Proverb. And so one, I just had that like massive overview of scripture. And then 2, the church that I was a member of a church called The Movement for about 20 years. And then the last year and a half, I've been at Rhythm Church. But that church went through a lot of different seasons. So we were initially like the rock and roll church, then we were kind of like the spirit-filled, super charismatic church, and then we like went hardcore spirit charismatic to like hardcore reformed. And basically like our associate pastor took the church through this like doctrine and theology class of like 12 weeks. We had to sign a covenant, and it was almost very similar to Driscoll's doctrine and theology book.
Right.
And so we went through that phase, and some of that was theological training. Like that was very intensive, though it was super reformed, which I don't hold all the same views of soteriology and all that kind of stuff. But it gave me an overview of the entire scriptures in a topical covenantal view of things. And I think that helped me a lot. And so it's like the sitting with the scriptures, the living with the scriptures, and then like going through some sort of like coursework where it's like very formal. And then I also did this thing called men's skills. My wife went through women's skills, and men's skills is like taking a combination of like Bible study and group therapy and try to put it all together. And that was like life changing. So that also gave life to the scriptures in a psychological standpoint. So I think those are the things. But yeah, I'm a product of the local church. Like I am a product of like faithfulness and consistency to being plugged into a local church
Wow.
and being submitted to pastors, and that culminating over the course of decades.
Well, that's evident.
Thank
And then you transfer that into hip hop.
Yeah. Oh, I tried.
I think you're good, bro.
Thank you. Yeah, hip hop was one of those things where I got saved, I was rapping, and I thought, I should do this for God.
Who were your influences first and foremost? Let's just go ahead and lay the foundation of people that inspired you hip hop wise.
So initially, Tupac and DMX early on. I mean, Tupac was who took me from being an atheist to a theist because he would just talk about God, and I was like, oh, well, there might be something to this. And then DMX kind of took me from being like open to Christianity because he'd do these crazy albums about just utter insanity, and then it'd always be the prayer
Right.
in the Christian song at the end of the album,
Right.
And so I would say initially those, and then I got really into like Nas, Jay-Z, like that was kind of like my era. Then there was like Tribe Called Quest, Black Star, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Fourth Avenue Jones. That was the roots when it got really like musical in neo soul, and so that's kind of like that era is like 95 to 2005 was like my era of like really immersing myself in that world, which was a very different era than what kind of came after that. And
Yeah, I was before that.
You were before that, okay?
Yeah, I was the EPMD.
Okay.
Man, Ice-T.
Ice-T, okay.
Remember him? I
Yeah,
mean, not the actor.
Yeah, no.
You know,
I
like,
remember him. Yeah,
he had a
so I came in while that era was kind of so
I
it
was
like,
Public Enemy.
Yeah, public. So one of my first, remember the cassette tapes you can get.
Oh yeah.
So one of the tapes I got was like Public Enemy, Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
Those. Yeah.
Come on, I was the
NWA.
Oh yeah, all of that, Eazy-E, all those guys, and but now as a huge fan of CHH, and you being a part of that initially, still I think you still got game in it. But still interacting in this space. What's your view right now?
Christian hip hop?
Christian hip hop.
Well, I think.
Do you like where it's going?
I think, okay, so from a technical standpoint, like if we're talking just music, I think Christian hip hop, and some people may disagree, I think it's actually better than regular hip hop. So I think if we're talking like what is the best of the best in Christian hip hop, whether it's No Big Deal, Indie Tribe, Lecrae, Forrest Frank, I think that Christian music is better than secular music right now. Forrest Frank had an interesting take where he said, we used to have to be okay with like suppressing our Christianity to listen to good art. Now people are going to be okay with looking away that we're Christian because we make better art than the world. I'm butchering the phrase, but he said something like that. Basically, hey, we would be okay with saying, hey, I don't like this guy's worldview, but like the music is so good, I gotta listen to it. And he's saying what I think is gonna happen. People are gonna say, hey, I'm not a Christian, but the music is so good that I'll still listen to it.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that's where we are right now with Christian music and like Christian adjacent music. I mean, if you look at a guy like Jake, JVKE, Golden Hour, like him and his brother Zach they love Jesus. They're the coolest dudes in the world. They're long ministry family. Guys like Nick D, even Connor Price on the latest Maverick City album, and he's trying to figure it out and searching for Jesus, and not albums, that song they did. So I think there's the Christian music is exceptional right now. I think it's phenomenal. And then I think Christian adjacent music, guys that are Christians that are making music that's clean, or maybe they're trying to figure it out, like a Connor Price is trying to figure out. I think he's going to come to the Lord, by the way. But I think those guys, it's there's nothing like it. And so like we went and saw Forrest Frank at the North Park Observatory, and 1,500 people, sold out show, packed in, and you got kids, you got families, you got everybody together, and he's doing it all. He's doing amazing hip hop songs. He's doing worship songs. He had a whole worship set in the middle of his set. There's a gospel presentation. There's a Switchfoot cover.
Come on.
Pop hit records that everybody knows the words to, deep cuts that only the core like he does it all. And so I look at him like, man, I think it's in a really, really, really cool place. And I do feel like more of the non-Christian audience will be like, you know what, I don't know about this whole Jesus thing, but you guys just make phenomenal music.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what else is happening, like whether it's Drake or Future, like I just think the music's kind of stale, or it's like the stuff that's quote unquote cutting edge is like the most debaucherous and or like street affiliated stuff. Like the drill scene has now really overlapped with the streets in parts of Florida and parts of Philadelphia. And I think people were just tired of it. I think people were over it. And they're feeling a sense of being complicit. Like the more I listen to this stuff, I'm literally enabling these kids to talk about killing their ops and smoking on the dead and all this craziness. And I think people are having like a moral reckoning. And you got all this amazing stuff that is built on the back of TikTok. Like these guys really leverage TikTok to get their music out there, right? The Jakes, the Connor Prices, the Nick D's. And I think there's just too many options that people have that are Christian and good. And I think there's a great shift happening that's happening. Now my only critique of it would be with the deeper you go into Christian hip hop, like overtly the CHH, the Flavor Fest, like that world, I think you have a lot of people that are following the Lecrae model of like, I want to be mainstream Christian without understanding what got Lecrae to want to do that in the first place. That Lecrae got to start in the church, that Lecrae is a local church guy himself. And so they're emulating the method without understanding how he arrived at the method. How did Tunnel Rats arrive at the method? How did these guys get to that mindset? And so now you had a moment of Christian music that was just kind of like vibey, no substance, but we just not cussing. We're gonna say all the same things, we're just not gonna cuss. And that to me is a little shallow, but I think we're starting to change that. I think that's slowly shifting out. That'd be my only like critique of it, is that like it's very like, yeah, it's been a little shallow, if I'm honest.
Well, there's some systematic theology starting to come out with some cats right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Who are you thinking?
You know, Prop.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been around. Shy Lynn, some of the old school cats. And you're seeing some of this. There's a guy named Jarrell I've been trying to get you to meet. He's in our city. Shout out to Jarrell. That just really, once more, they're all dudes that have grown up in the church, been discipled, a proper understanding of theology, and realizing that it's the premise of Isaiah 55 that the word of God does not return without void. And that's not just in proclamation, in regards to preaching and testifying. That comes through music.
Yeah, that's good.
I think there's a lot of cats going, man, the more word I can put in to this, that there's a true transformation process.
Yeah.
Your view of secular sacred, there's a line there that many people have drawn.
Yeah.
I believe all things are sacred. But when we talk about mainstream, we talk about CHH or even anybody in the Christian industry and the crossing over of that, it's so interesting because Chandler Moore, by the way, this is tonight we're hosting Chandler Moore and we're time stamping this. It's November 4th. It is the night of the election. And we're going to speak to that in just a second because I want to hear who you think's going to win. But and who you voted for. I won't ask you that question. But Chandler Moore does something with Will Smith. And the Christian community just is in an uproar. Not all of it, but a good faction of it. Your opinion in those spaces where there's collabs with people, and because I think God's doing something in Will Smith's life. I think so when we talk about bringing the light into those places, but yet there are Christians going, no, stay in that genre. And I'm going, how do you leverage the influence and favor that a guy like Chandler Moore, who I'm a huge fan of, respect greatly, been on a journey and coming back to a reality of what God's birthed him to do in this calling. But then you get favor with a Will Smith, and then we're going to be down on a dude. We're going to be down on a dude like Lecrae doing something with Kendrick. You've sold out. Like, what's your opinion with that mentality? Obviously, I don't think you're for that. Where people are so critical, but where would you land on that? What's the tension in that?
Well, it's interesting. I just sat
in the world, not of the world.
Yeah, in the world, not of the world. I just sat down with the Maverick City guys. They're supposed to be coming out soon, so I sat down with JJ, EJ, and Norm, and we had like a 3-hour conversation going over every single moment like they had like that. And I think I would just say it's on a case by case basis. I do think there are certain things that would fall into a this is a unequally yoked type of relationship and arrangement, in the sense that when something's coming out as a joint release and it's packaged like we are both putting this out together, that could be dicey. And I would say my question to them, and my question to them repeatedly, and my question to Lecrae was, is there anyone that can't get you on a song? Is there anyone that you just go, nah, I can't.
Yeah,
I can't
there's a
do
line
that.
there.
There has to be a line there. And so they had a song, Maverick City. I don't think Chandler had anything to do with this, but they had a song with Glorilla. And I was like, that's straight vagina murder rap.
Yeah.
That's what she raps about. She raps about her vagina and she raps about murdering other women. What? Like, how does that, well, her name means Gloria, hallelujah, and she loves Jesus, and her parents. And I said, I hear you, and that's how I felt about DMX. But we saw how that ended. And enabling him to be a deacon at a church and to give him, right? And so, like, can someone's genuine heart be for the Lord and their life be incongruent to that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 1 Corinthians is an example of that. But can we, in good faith, come alongside of them, partner with them, and say, without there being rebuke and correction, right? I think that's the tension that we live in. And so I would say it's on a case-by-case basis. I think that was one of those things where I was like, man, I don't know if this was wise for you guys to do. I don't know if this was wise. But they did a Connor Price record. And I was like, hey, Connor Price, generally clean artist. I think he said like the S word once. Yeah, it's a little bravado and a little braggadocious nature. And then the song opens with Jesus. The first word on the song is, Jesus, please have mercy on me. The song is it's a very gospel-centered song, even though Connor's not preaching on the song. The hook, the whole moment of it is like, it's a great record. That to me is a much more congruent. So what's worse, right? Someone that's not a Christian, he's telling you he's not a Christian, trying to seek God on a Christian song, or someone that's saying they're a Christian on a Christian song, but the rest of their branding, public persona, everything they represent is in complete opposition to the gospel. I don't know. I would go with the one that's like, hey, this dude's like beating his chest, Lord, have mercy on me. That's like what the song reminds me of, versus the Glorilla moment. And so I would say it's on a case-by-case basis. The Will Smith thing, you brought that up. I thought that was more of an inspirational song. That reminded me of R. Kelly's I Believe I Can Fly.
Yes.
Which wasn't that written by a gospel artist?
I think it has the accent of it, or the influence of it.
Yes, I want to say someone Christian may have written that for him. I don't remember who. But that was a moment, that was a beautiful moment in the 90s, right? The Space Jam, I Believe I Can Fly. I didn't see that as a Christian song. I saw that as it's an inspirational, hopeful song. And that's how I categorized the Will Smith moment. It was like, this is a inspirational song. It's not a Christian song.
Right.
It's an inspirational song. And man, if this is what gets Will thinking about Jesus and all these sorts of things, may the Lord use that, Would I have done it? I don't know. Not without some really serious conversations with him about his worldview and where is he at and what are we doing, I think there's some good tension there to wrestle with. So I don't draw hard lines. I go, does this make sense? And I go, can I sit down in good faith with someone without making clear distinctions? Can I go on a podcast like No Jumper and not rebuke Adam 22 for some of his debaucherous lifestyle? Can I do that? I don't think I could do that as a podcaster, so I don't know how artists can do that without like, now we're gonna do a duel in music. Like that doesn't, so like, how does that work? So I think like, I have conversations with non-Christians all the time. I have conversations with progressive Christians all the time that I disagree with them. But it's in the context of, I can have a conversation, but there's clear distinctions to say, I'm not endorsing everything you represent. I think the tough part is people don't have the nuance to understand that Chandler is not endorsing Will Smith slapping Chris Rock on stage.
Correct.
However, you are standing next to him in the midst of a very messy season for him that may be used to the glory of God, or it may enable him. And I'm concerned about the enablement too, because R. Kelly dropped the gospel album. It was beautiful. I love that He Saved Me album. DMX, right? And I go, oof, I don't want those stories to end that way. Christians in their life being like, yeah, the Lord loves you, but there's no truth. It has to be grace and truth. There has to be, we have to love you. There's a seat at the table for you. We're always willing to have a seat at the table for you, but we're going to tell you the truth. And like, bro, you got to really reconsider some areas of your life, because what you've been doing clearly isn't working. You need to repent and believe in Jesus. And I think sometimes as creatives, I could just speak for myself. I don't want to speak on anyone's. I think sometimes we're afraid to say those things. We're afraid to be like, hey, man, I'll do this record with you, but we got to have a really serious heart-to-heart conversation about you needing to change some things in your life, off camera or on camera. You know, I sat down with Tyrese for a long time, and there were some moments we've had off camera and moments I had on camera with him, telling him, like, you need to get into church. Like, you need to get around more Christians. Like, those sorts of conversations. And I continue having those conversations with him. But there can't be this, like, yeah, I'm going to just rubber stamp whatever you're doing and be like, yeah, he said Jesus. He said God. He didn't cuss on it.
Right.
I go, nah, man, that doesn't serve them well. So I don't know. I don't know what happened behind the scenes with Chandler and Will.
I'm going to go ahead and go on record that probably in good faith that Chandler brought the gospel.
I would hope so.
I'm going to go on good faith.
Yeah, I would hope so.
I think that he was intentional in light of where he is.
Privately.
Yeah,
I would hope so. I would hope so. And hopefully.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I would hope so. I don't know how those things work.
But watch this. What's interesting about this conversation is the fact that so many times people of, let's just say, that are unapologetically Christian, that are not goofy and awkward, that have some influence, that all of a sudden people that are in professional sports or in professional creative content or music or whatever it may be, all of a sudden are drawn to. And then I've always made a comment to people that I've met that are in those worlds. I'm not the dude that's posting. I'm not going to post.
Yeah.
I'm never going to ask you for tickets.
Yep.
I'm never going to ask you for stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for favors. I'm the dude behind the scenes that's going to pray for you along the way. And just, I'm here. I'm not that guy.
That's good.
You got enough people around you doing that.
Yes.
I'm just going to be Pastor Ed.
That's good.
You want to hoop? I'll hoop. We'll hang.
Yeah.
You let me know. Praying for your wife. Know your kids.
Yeah.
Praying for them.
That's good.
But in this, the moment all of a sudden something gets posted and all of that deal, you never get the opportunity to explain. So you're kind of just guilty by association in those moments, and nobody knows the backstory. But everybody fills in the blanks, and that's the unfortunate reality of how these things work, is because it's like, this is the gap. We saw this, we know this, and in the process of that, we just lob in stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where this gets real weird sometimes. And so it's the dichotomy of the fact that we got to bring the light into these places.
Yes.
And I like to refer to myself as like a cultural anthropologist. Like, I'm studying humanity. I want to bring the gospel. Apostle Paul says, I become all things to all people that I might win some. Yeah. But he does not compromise the gospel. Yeah. He brings the gospel, but it's Mars Hill.
Yeah. So Acts 17, I was thinking that when you said that.
It's he's reasoning, and he uses Greek philosophers of the day and Epimenides.
Yeah. He quotes their own poets to them, as your own poets have said.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He quotes them, and then he takes the statue to the unknown God, and then completely flips the script on it and goes, let me tell you who he is.
Yeah.
And I think that's the role of all of us as kingdom people.
That's good.
That's the role. And it will be misunderstood.
Yeah. I think, and here's the thing, I think people have to be okay with it being misunderstood and
Completely.
The potential backlash. But then don't be upset when your Christian audience misunderstands you.
That's
and
the word.
You didn't explain it. Because no one understands the thing. And again, credit to Maverick City that they're doing a podcast now. They want to get ahead of these things. They want to drive their own narrative. That's why I said every pastor should have a podcast. Be able to sit down and go deeper in nuanced aspects and share your heart on why this happened or why we regret it. And that, oddly enough, the Maverick City guys are like, I don't know about the Will Smith thing.
Yeah.
We like this moment. We like this moment. We don't know about that.
It was the ring of fire that probably got him.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. The ring of fire, But I got it. I wasn't offended by the ring of fire,
Yeah.
I was just more like, oh, okay. Again, my question just goes, if the gospel is being proclaimed, then by all means, let's go out there and let's do it. And is there anyone that can't get you on a record?
That was a word.
Is there anyone, and I pressed them about that privately and publicly. Like, is there, do you draw lines, And so anyway, I'm excited to see where that goes. I love that there's stuff happening, but I also think, like, we can't be upset at Christians for being confused by some of these things.
That's a good word.
Right? And they're just trying to be good Bereans. And they're looking at the passage in 2 Corinthians about not being equally yoked. And what does that mean? And how does this work? And so I think when someone seemingly rises in such a pure organic fashion, which with Maverick City, man, it just seems like the Lord just breathed on those brothers and they just, you know? And then all of a sudden it looks like these like industry moments. You go, what's going on over there? And I don't think people should be dismissed and discarded for questioning and asking reasonable things, right? And so that's why, again, I think everybody should have their own podcast and their own ability to go on and explain these things.
Well, the fact that you're on this podcast is I mean, it really is a full circle moment. I could sit here for hours, and I'm not trying to have like a Rogan Trump 3-hour conversation, 3-hour deal, but I could. I promise you, I could, because there's like so many questions I want to ask you, man. But when we talk about, I'm just going to lob two, and they're not even related. Okay. Evolution.
Okay.
Taught in our school books.
Okay.
Do you believe it's the source of racism in our country?
Whoa. I've never thought of it that way. That's a great question. Is evolution the source of racism in our country?
We taught it subliminally.
I think.
Can I paint the picture for you? If you look at the evolutionary scale of the progression of quote unquote Cro-Magnon man to intelligent being, what's the color grade?
Oh, I see what you're saying. And so the person that's of a darker color is less evolved. Yeah.
Which is why African-American community has been called monkeys.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, I think there's something to it. I want to think through that a bit more. I do think that racism as we know it in America, specifically the view that black people are inferior, predates any concepts of evolution. Because I mean, when was Darwin around? That was later.
Yeah.
Right?
And you'd have to go back to. I mean, there's yes.
Maybe the modern versions of
Correct.
it today. But I think we've unfortunately, in whether that's through British paradigm, American paradigm, whatever, unfortunately that predates the subjugation of black people and descendants of slaves as inferior, and then maybe they started maybe that came as the downstream effects of it in a modern context. I could definitely see that, but it seems like our view in terms of black people being superior in America, the historical American paradigm on slavery, which was different because there's slavery all over the world, but it wasn't racialized as much, right? And it wasn't chattel slavery where you can indefinitely own people. I think that predates evolution, but I wonder if evolution gave weight to it in our modern context and continued through the institutional. Or I mean, here's a I'll take your evolution and I'll one up you. Race realism in the sense of IQ disparities, because that's and you want to you go really 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 on the deep end of the right and you get into that world, and they argue hardcore that because the average white IQ is I think 105 and the average black IQ is 100, that there's a 4-point disparity or something crazy. And they don't factor in environmental elements, right? White kid comes from 2-parent household, stable financially. Black kid comes from 2-parent. And then when you look at those numbers, there's not much of a disparity there. But that has been used as an argument for racism recently. Like that's still a IQ, real IQ, real racism in the sense of IQ has been used. I wonder if that's connected to some of that.
I'm sure it is.
These people are just smarter than these people, which IQ is only one litmus test of someone's value and intelligence.
Well, and that could be environmental.
Yeah, it is. That's what they found. They did studies with twins. I did a whole video on this, and they did studies with different twins, and based on environment, they found out that a lot of it is environmental.
It's about opportunity.
Yeah.
It's not about color.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you being a part of a multicultural family, you have a beautiful family, by the way. We have an African-American son that we adopted from Ethiopia. And and my wife's Filipino. And so we got just a tremendous amount of diversity in our home. But understanding and teaching, because everything is so polarizing right now. The beauty of God's creation, Imago Dei.
Yes.
The truth of one nation, Genesis 11, Tower of Babel, dispersion, Acts 17:26. God is sovereign over the nations. God's for the nations. God's for every tribe and tongue and people group. And you see the dispersion, and it's Acts 2 that brings them back together, and there's a common spirit language through the Holy Spirit. And you see all of this. And man, I'm telling you, this conversation of racism it's continuing to be on the forefront. And it gets moved to the side, it gets brought to the front, it gets moved to the side, it gets brought to the front. But man, I'm praying over our nation that we could figure out the understanding of Imago Dei. But this is what I go back to. So when there's no absolute truth and there's no Imago Dei and there's no equality before God, man, woman, etc., where do you begin?
Right.
Where do you begin? And so you look at social science experiments and all of a sudden, and you look back and you go back to Hitler. Hitler at some level, it was a eugenics deal, which goes back to evolution and all of those things and pure race and who's the pure race and all these things. And you go, man, as we talk about unity in our land right now, you see it's a black and white issue, but it's got to be a kingdom issue. And the necessity of churches. I mean, most segregated day of the week is on Sundays.
Yeah.
And how churches have to become more multicultural.
Yeah.
In this process.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I would just say I think there's a way that we have to talk about history truthfully.
Yes.
And not in a way that debilitates people or makes the other group as the bad people.
Well, yes.
Right? Because if you talk about, and this isn't just with race, I mean, this has happened within the red pill manosphere community. They've created their own version of original sin for women, about their version of wanting to get a higher value man and all this foolishness, right? And it's complete pseudoscience. It's nonsense. Right? And so hypergamy is like, so it's like you've created another category that makes women inferior and more sinful than men. And so that's not exclusive to the race conversation. We do that all the time. And so within the context of the race conversation specifically, we have to speak about stuff truthfully. My son is a descendant of slaves and he's Armenian. We taught him about the Armenian genocide and we talk about slavery. We teach about both, but we don't do it in a way that debilitates him or says that the system is rigged, you can never get ahead, you're bad, or these people are all bad.
Correct.
Right? These people are uniquely more sinful than you are. And which is interesting because as a guy that's white.
Because that's what critical race theory is doing.
It is. And as a guy that's white, but I'm Armenian, like our genocide was 1915. It wasn't that long ago. I've always been interested. It's always been intriguing for folks to be like, you've benefited from the system. And I'm like, how? Like we come from nothing. My lineage had nothing to do with the atrocities here in America. That's incoherent, you know? And so, because then when you get into colorism, because there's a difference between colorism.
Hello, preach it.
You get into colorism. But here's the trippy part about colorism is many Nigerians and Jamaicans and folks that come from other parts of the world outperform whites here.
Yes. Yes.
That doesn't make it. The highest earners in America are Indians. So you want to talk about colorism, but yet the folks with the most color are often outperforming native white people here. So what do we do with that? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't fit the narrative.
So I think there's an argument to be made for, hey, descendants of slaves have been disproportionately affected because of, from slavery to Jim Crow to bad laws in the 80s. I don't want to ascribe malice intent to all those laws, but the war on drugs and Nixon and the racist things he said and then wanting to wipe out the N-words and the hippies. And then you have this crazy connection to the CIA knowingly allowing cocaine to flood the streets and then waging these crazy consequences on black people. Yeah, that impacts people.
And redlining.
Yeah, and redlining. I mean, yeah, redlining is a big one. So, like, yes, bad policies from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, let's say 30, 40, 50 years ago, impact people today.
Still do.
We should be able to say that soberly without saying, and you can't get ahead because the system's regs against you and you can't ever do anything. So I think it's and both. Like we need to have conversations about the history and the reality without debilitating people, which is what I think critical race theory or whatever pseudo version, because critical race theory is like a legal scholarly event, right? Well, we're dealing with the faux critical race theory of like the Robin DiAngelos and the Kim D's.
Correct.
That to me is utter poison.
Critical race theory is a study that basically reveals that there is a form of racism
within the law post civil rights.
Correct.
Yeah, that's different.
It's a historical reality.
It's a historical analysis of legal cases.
Correct.
That's different than what Kim D and Robin DiAngelo and the stuff that Matt Walsh talked about on I Am Racist and that whole world of DEI. That's a different totally different conversation. And that stuff to me is poison. Like it is utterly poison to tell a certain demographic that
you are the oppressor.
You are the oppressor. It's like, wait a minute. Well, how?
No matter what you do, you are the oppressor for the rest of your life.
Right. That's
because you check
awful.
These boxes.
That's awful. And I think it's caused a lot of confusion and a lot of harm and done more to hurt racial reconciliation.
And that was my point.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that we came to that point because it only perpetuates this.
Yeah. I mean, listen,
The DEI conversation right now is like folks are going, it was an attempt.
Yeah.
It's not working.
It's not working. The studies show that it's made people more racist. You're more apprehensive to people of different races after going through these EI programs. And listen, America, the same states that elected Trump in 2016 elected Obama in 2008 and 2012. So miss me with like this whole like half of the country hates immigrants and people of color. No, that's not it. I promise you that's not it. They were cool with getting Obama in because he was a solution to the warmongering that we saw with the Bush administration. I don't think Bush was all bad, but overcorrection to Bush, you get Obama, and then after 8 years of Obama, you get Trump. It's like an overcorrection to an overcorrection to an overcorrection, and here we are.
And that is society.
Yeah.
The pendulum just keeps swinging.
It keeps swinging to the opposite extremes.
Now, and here we are on the night of election.
Oh gosh, this is going to either age poorly or we're prophets.
We got to figure out how to can we get the podcast out today? That's the question, because it would be the precursor. However, let's talk in the hypothetical, all right? Okay, let's talk in the fact of we're in the current, and then also because this is going to come out after the election, we got to speak of what could be.
Yeah.
All right? Is that possible to teleport?
Yeah, listen, the sky isn't falling if your guy didn't win. Whatever happened,
you said guy.
Your guy or gal, excuse me. Your person.
I thought you were being prophetic.
No. Oh, gosh. The sky's not falling. I don't think America collapses with either of these people. Jesus is still on the throne.
Come on.
I think we'll be fine because I believe the checks and balances in the systems will get us through whoever you think is the bad person. I think that from my vantage point, there definitely seems to have been two things have happened. The Overton window has went way left in terms of some of the stuff we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Which the independent voter, maybe the person that's center left or center right, has felt pushed into the right. And that's where a lot of us have felt.
Like defund the police.
Yeah. Like what? That doesn't make any sense.
And now they're going, bad idea.
Bad idea. Which, by the way, was never even popular amongst the black community, according to the data. It's like 70%, 75% of black folks were like, no, that's a bad idea. No, we need more police. Just train them better. Put body cams on them, train them better, pay them more. I don't know, figure it out. We just don't want to be brutalized by police, which, by the way, the police brutality thing was so goofy because we should all be against that. We should be like, no, because yes, white people are negatively impacted. Poor white people are negatively impacted by bad policing too. We should all be like, no, bad policing, bad. We're so, hey, we don't like the surveillance state and overreach and government, so that was the whole goofy thing to me that I think it was a miscalculation on Black Lives Matter to make it exclusively a black thing. Like the conversation should have been police brutality bad.
Yes.
It's bad.
Yes.
It hurts everybody, including white people.
Yes.
Fix it. Figure it out, right? If it's can't wait, if it's body cams. So I think as that window has shifted, the country has went more conservative, it seems like. And so I don't know how that's going to flesh out practically. I don't know what that's going to look like, because that's the sense I'm getting on the ground. The conversations I'm having is like, man, but again, I mean, it's going to come down, by the time listening to this, to a couple of states, Pennsylvania, maybe Michigan. That's it.
How did they know it comes down to those states before the election even begins?
Because of the surge in the Sun Belt states, specifically Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. It seems like it was pretty clear that he was going to be the victor there. Now, again, this all might age like milk. And then she, I guess because of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan was going to get those states. And then it really comes down to Pennsylvania, which I think last year Pennsylvania was a state he needed. He lost to Georgia and Pennsylvania last time over the last 4 years. So yeah, I think it's looking like, again, this might age like milk, Pennsylvania will decide.
It comes down to Pennsylvania tonight.
Yeah, I think so. Well, tomorrow is when everybody's voting, which...
That's right, tomorrow.
Yeah, which is in light of how much will the bad Puerto Rico joke impact the 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania?
That's a very valid question.
Which Joe Rogan told Tony, that's the joke that's going to get you stabbed. you may not want to do that joke anymore. He did that joke in a nightclub the night before in New York, did the same joke, and it bombed.
Because Puerto Rico is well represented in New York.
Well represented in New York. So he did that joke, it bombed in a nightclub. He said, I'll do better when I speak at this event. And then it bombed even worse there. So to me, and I think Rogan said that some people on the campaign did know the joke was in there and they still let it through, which is like, that's a gross miscalculation on your guys' part.
And then Biden comes out and
with
says—
the garbage, which was, I mean, that was an alley-oop. The garbage supporters, that was an alley-oop. Even if he may have meant garbage supporter, he may have been talking about just about Tony, if I'm going to be fair to him. I don't think that's what he meant, but even if he did mean that, so sloppy, so late in the game, and then Trump takes it and makes it a moment, pulling up. It's theater. It's all theater. It's the most entertaining election I've ever seen. I will say that. It's amazing.
And the media outlets have to keep it neck and neck.
Oh yeah.
They cannot show the disparity between one candidate or the next because we would not be interested.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am more so just curious on how it's going to play out. Like I'm like, oh man, this is like, the anticipation is thick. For anyone, I've always kept up with politics. I've never been a registered Democrat or a Republican. I've always been an independent guy. I lean way more conservative now, not on all things, but I would say most things. I still have some. I don't know about those tariffs. I don't know about how, housing. I don't know about, the tax cuts for the billionaires. Some of that stuff makes me a little ugh, from a policy standpoint. But generally speaking, I'm way more aligned on whatever the policies are there, from guns to the unborn to deregulating building stuff. But I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go, man. I have no idea. My dad, who also came as an immigrant, wasn't in my life. We reconciled. We had a conversation. We have lots of really interesting conversations. He still has some of that communist nostalgia, but he was the bootlegger in communism.
Wow.
So he was importing contraband and selling it. And so when we left Baku, he had like $20,000 American dollars cash in a freezer that he left behind, that somebody was supposed to come over and bring it to him and smuggle it to him, and they didn't. And so that, like, context for who my dad is.
Yeah.
He is wildly successful, lives in Del Mar, beautiful home, 5 minutes from the beach. Like, and he told me he's voting for Harris, but he said if DeSantis would have ran, I would have voted for DeSantis. Yeah. And I was like, huh, that's really interesting to me. So I wonder how many people are like, I can't. No one's voting for anyone this election. They're just voting against.
Yeah.
You're just voting against the person like that's what this is. No one's I don't think that's not true. Some people are definitely excited about Trump, but I think that the people that who are going to make up this whole thing are going to vote against a person, not for a person. The swing voters, the independent voters are voting against the other guy. That's what I think is coming down to.
30 million Christians didn't vote last election.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy.
And so in this election, I believe the evangelical community probably for the first time is maybe hearing the bell being rung in this space of what are biblical convictions?
Yeah.
What does it mean not to just, because our vote is not just a vote, it's your voice. It's a voice unto what your worldview is.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time, Christians in this conversation of political disparities are asking the question, what do I really believe? And that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's a good thing to wrestle through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this moment, I once more, we could continue on, but I want to just give an opportunity for our viewership to know how to stay connected, because I cannot recommend more for anybody watching this podcast right now to subscribe to every platform this brother has. I could not validate more the fact that you being a part of just viewing and listening and receiving and even digesting, you will walk with Jesus at a better level in your life because you'll be informed of Scripture, but also not just from a head knowledge, but a heart knowledge and in hand knowledge of how to live this out in your everyday life. But Ruslan, how do they follow you?
Yeah, Ruslan KD on all platforms. I actually brought you something.
What?
Yeah, so I brought you our leadership planner, but I brought you something. So right now, this is the sample version. So Ruslan KD on all platforms, blessgod.shop is where they can get this. So this is my first ever 60-day devotional that I just finished. Now, this is the...
Wow.
We haven't gotten these in yet. So by the time this is out, it'll be up on blessgod.shop.
When I was with you on your podcast, you were working on this.
I was working on it. So that is a devotional taking people through the narrative of the Scriptures in 60 days, 35 of the Old Testament, 25 of the New Testament. If you open it, there's sections to write in. So it's an interactive journal.
Wow.
Devotional. And yeah, so there's the devotion on one side, and then you write in questions. And you got your place for prayer requests. We're big on prayer journaling. I think like writing out your prayers is really good. So we have like a prayer journal, and so we work that in there so people can write. Because I think when you write something down, you're more likely to remember it.
85%.
Yeah, and then the more likely you'll remember it, you're more likely to remember the things God is doing for you,
That's
moving
good.
with you,
That's
answering,
good.
or maybe answering not the way you want, and changing your heart. And I think that reaffirms our faith. And so anyway, there's 3 of those in existence right now. And you have the second one. Yeah, but that's the sample. You have the second one.
Wow.
Tim Ross has one. You have one. And I have one at the studio. So I wanted to bring you that because I thought that'd be special. And then, yeah, we got our leadership plan. I don't know if I gave you one of these last time. But I brought you the leadership plan. This also has the prayer journal. As a leader, as a pastor, there's a section for, of course, your prayer requests. But there's a cool little problem-solving framework at the end of that that I think you'll appreciate. Yeah, so blessgod.shop for those. We got merch, all that good stuff. And then, yeah, blessgodsummit.com.
Yeah, because when we were together, you were ideating of the possibility of doing some road shows.
Yeah, well, we want to do some stuff for the book when the book comes out, which will be at the September-ish, 2025. But we really want to bring people in person. Like the parasocial thing is cool and people watching you is cool, but like bringing people together and then like equipping them for actually doing the ministry in their real lives and immersing them in an environment where they can get poured into, they can be inspired, is really the heart of like the Bless God Summit. It's like in-person events. We're going to do more of those, but that's happening. And 27th, 28th, 29th, I want to see if I can get you there because I would love to have you there. We have, of course, my pastor, Pastor Jeff. We have Preston Perry, Dr. Sean McDowell, Alan Parr, John McCrae. We have America's Got Talent winner, Dustin Tavella, who's doing a really amazing inspirational set. And performances by Miles Minnick, John Keith. And that's just the first lineup.
All-star lineup.
We're working on the second lineup of confirmations. And we're doing it when I was struggling with this, trying to find a church.
Yeah.
Man, I could not find a church to take my money. It was crazy.
You don't even need money.
So next one we'll do here.
Free.
In San Antonio.
I mean, not to the people, but we won't charge you.
So we're doing the Westin Resort right in Carlsbad, a mile from the beach, next to Legoland.
I've seen it, bro.
It's beautiful. So God kind of hooked it up to where we found out that the owner of it was Christian and he wanted to help out, and so this is the first one, man. So we're hoping that people come and get equipped and then are sent out to be the hands and feet of Jesus and have a tactical plan for, first and foremost, the home and your day-to-day, your choices, your decisions, your family, how you lead that, connected through the church and the authority of the church over our lives, and then into the marketplace. So that's the flow of the conferences. The church, theology, apologetics, why you should be a part of a local church, into the home, your family, your routines, health, fitness, and then day 3 is like, now we go out to the marketplace and we're going to highlight different
What's
people.
the date? Anybody watching right now?
March 27th, 28th, 29th in Carlsbad, blessgodsummit.com for all that information.
Check that out for sure. And I know for those of you that might want to check that, by the way, just going to where you live in that part of the country, man, it's the most beautiful place I've ever been.
Yeah, and it's on site. So like everybody who wants to be on site can be on site, hanging out with the speakers, and it's a resort. It's beautiful.
Speaking of hanging out, you took me to the Top Gun house.
I did. That was fun. That was fun. And I took you to the pier.
You took me to the pier.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, this brother is worth a follow. And not only worth a follow, worth investing in these resources with this leadership journal, also the 60-day devotional, and a new book that's coming out in September of 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, in the comment section right now, please show some love to Ruslan KD. And as always, we'll be back once a month. Fresh content. Let us know along the way of something that you'd be intrigued by in the conversation. And we look forward to being back with Pastor Q and Pastor Hutch as we continue this conversation of trending as the Bible speaks the culturally concepts that sometimes have a tendency to infiltrate in the church that the church doesn't talk about. We want to talk about them. We want to address them from a biblical worldview. And as always, until we meet again, much love.
Peace.